Back during the Brexit campaign, John Harris of The Guardian made a film about Labour voters who were voting to leave, link below. To me, the film was rather instructive. One section of the film showed student activists out canvassing, and when someone pointed out that they were voting leave and the reason being that immigrants were taking council housing, the student immediately chipped in with, "No, they have to prove they have a local connection," or words to that effect. And as they cut to the student walking away, presumably having had the door slammed in their face, Harris said, "Some people won't listen to facts," or words to that effect, and the student agreed, completely ignoring the fact that he is a student and therefore knows precisely bog all about anything. Brexit is a useful place to discuss the madness infecting the student union that is the current Labour Party. Visit any Labour blog or discussion group, because if you're sane you'll stay away from these people in person, and aside from the endless rabbiting about fascist this and fascist that and remember the 80s from people whose parents weren't old enough to remember the 80s, one thing they all agree on, certainly if they are Corbyn supporters, is that it would be really great to have a massive spending programme to build millions of houses, renationalise the railways, build up public services and invest in the future. Oh, and they are opposed to Brexit and will never have heard of Legxit. The only problem is that being in the EU means that the Corbyn plan to do all this house building and polishing the turd that is Britain's public sector will be illegal under the fiscal and budget rules of the EU. Now obviously there is little point in explaining this to any of the Trofimovs who hang around the Labour sites on the interwebs. If you are lucky, they will demand to know if you have read Buckle, but more generally you will be condemned as a fascist or a racist and told to vote for someone else. Of course, the irony being that had they been around in the 1980s when John Harris joined the Labour Party and I was a staunch supporter of Tony Benn, they would know that history has rather vindicated the 1983 manifesto, described as the longest suicide note in history. Deep down, I think John Harris knows this, but he also knows that he would lose his job at The Guardian if he broke out of the groupthink about Brexit. So he feigns surprise that anyone would not choose to remain, while allowing the film to demonstrate quite clearly and obviously the boarded up shops, the general grime, the lack of civic pride, why people are voting to leave and why increasingly they are not supporting the Labour Party. Corbyn plays a similar game. Quite why anyone was shocked when he gave the EU 7 out of 10 I can't say. I'm more surprised he gave it such a high mark. Certainly his brother Piers was. I mean, it is one thing for the zealots on Labour forums not to know that Corbyn's proposed spending plans are illegal under EU law, but surely Mr Corbyn knows this. Or John MacDonald, the Shadow Chancellor, he must know. Surely Corbyn knows too that the EU won't allow renationalisation of the railways or allow the post office to compete on a level playing field with the private mail services. There must be someone within the Labour Party that knows that the energy policy isn't working, and it would not be such a terrible idea if a few mines were reopened to provide fuel for a few coal-fired power stations. And if Jeremy is worried about the global warming gang, he can get his brother Piers to set them straight. And surely Mr Corbyn is aware that he was first elected as an MP in 1983 on that manifesto that called for withdrawal from the EEC. Yet after the victory for Brexit/Legxit, the Labour Party went bonkers, and in traditional style everyone called everyone else a fascist, and all sides demanded a purity test for their opinions. It is only a matter of time before it becomes Labour Party policy that voters will be required to take a similar purity test before they are allowed to vote Labour. Now, There is a serious point to be made here as to why the Labour Party has allowed itself to be brainwashed into believing that if you are opposed to immigration, then you are a racist. It goes back to the brilliant wheeze of adopting the Democrats' plan from America and combining it with Ken Livingstone's strategy that saw him rise to power on the GLC. In essence, there are sections of society that will vote Labour no matter what, and therefore, in order to get the extra required votes, you need to pander to ethnic and other minorities, gays, blacks, the Irish, etc. The Muslim vote is particularly useful for a number of reasons, though it does have the problem of what to do about the Jews. The only problem with the plan is that those sections of society that will vote Labour no matter what, well, they don't and won't. The classic example is in Scotland. Back when devolution was being pushed by Donald Dewar in the heyday of the Blair Revolution, Blair declared that it would mean perpetual Labour government for the United Kingdom, or words to that effect, with the result that after 2 election cycles, Scotland kicked Labour out of office, voted in the SNP, and Labour is now trailing in third in Scotland behind the Tories. And increasingly, the policy of calling everyone in England a racist or a Little Englander to scare them into voting Labour, along with the disastrous policies of the Blair-Brown administration and the general uselessness of Labour councils playing the pandering game, is having a similar effect across Labour's heartlands in northern and central England, and similar things are happening in Wales. Thus the party is in danger of being gutted, leaving only the pandered to minorities, some celebrities, the die-hard "my grandfather voted for Ramsay MacDonald" crowd, and a bunch of twatty students who appear to have modelled themselves on the Jane Horrocks character in Life is Sweet, of whom Laurie Penny is the classic example. These students are brilliant at pissing people off, and to the casual observer offer a wonderful source of amusement. For instance, a new poll came out showing that the Tories had lost 3 points and Labour 1 point, and the reaction from these political geniuses was that Labour had closed the gap on the Tories by 2 points. Well, yes, except the core Labour vote is traditionally 25% of the electorate, and dropping 1% puts Labour on 24%, which means Labour is now so unpopular that it cannot win an election, but it's losing support among the people, who will never vote for any party except Labour, but now apparently will. And I mentioned the Jews before. The Harris film shows him out and about with the local MP, Ruth Smeeth, who happens to be Jewish. Now, Mr. Corbyn has a slight problem in that he is often seen around town arm in arm with various Islamic types with dubious views, and indeed so is Mr. Livingstone. And while all this adds to the merriment of painting the right-wing media, which is another source of paranoia for the student types, as racists feeding the racist masses, "Don't be a racist, vote the same way as your father," etc., all of which is fine when you're a backbench member of the awkward squad, which is what Corbyn, Abbott, Livingstone built their careers on, but it tends to be viewed rather differently when you're the leader of the opposition, especially when the Tories have started playing the game of sectional politics too, and particularly when Labour Muslim MPs and local councillors have a penchant for taking to Twitter to air their views about Jews, Zios and Zionists in less than flattering ways. Thus, to settle the issue once and for all, the Labour Party held an inquiry into whether or not the party is anti-Semitic, and to oversee this forensically detailed process they appointed Shami Chakrabarti. Surely not the same Shami Chakrabarti who turned up at a protest against police racism and told a crowd of Muslims that the police were Islamophobes and it was outrageously racist that Sajid Badat had been taken in for questioning by the Islamophobic police. Yes, that's Shami Chakrabarti. For those wondering, Sajid Badat was a conspirator in the shoe bomb plot with Richard Reed, and his house, when searched the day after Miss Chakrabarti made her speech, was found to have enough explosives to lower the house prices in Gloucester. So, amid Ken Livingstone using Hitler to prove that Bradford West MP Naz Shah was not being anti-Semitic in her comments that she had apologised for and admitted in the apology that she was being anti-Semitic, Miss Chakrabarti set off to investigate if the Labour Party has a problem with Jews. And of course she found that the real problem was that there were not enough women and people of colour, and that no one had ever said anything anti-Semitic in the Labour Party, ever. Which could be seen as technically true, depending on how technical you want to get, as Naz Shah, who had already admitted that she was being anti-Semitic when she said what she said, was at the time suspended from the Labour Party. So I suppose it is the sort of statement that Snopes could declare as true, seeing as Snopes would probably agree with the political persuasion of the Labour Party, assuming Snopes or anyone else knows what they are. And to prove the point that the Labour Party needed more people of colour and didn't have a problem with Jews, up pops Mark Wadsworth, person of colour, at the press conference for the Labour Likes Jews report, with remarks that made Ruth Smeeth, Jewish MP, walk out and burst into tears. Mr. Wadsworth's remarks were along the lines that Mrs. Smeeth was working hand in hand with the right-wing press, which apparently was not meant to infer that Jews control the media, though a quick look round the interwebs revealed that many of the usual suspects picked up on the dog whistle, and afterwards Mr. Corbyn and Mr. Wadsworth shared a laugh. But regardless, if the scam buoyed up the ethnic non-Jewish vote, then drinks all round, and a damehood for Miss Chakrabarti. There was a report from the Fabian Society that came out today that rather summed up the complete and utter shambles that is the current Labour Party. The report was entitled "Too Weak to Win, Too Strong to Die," which sums it up really.